So you all took some time to submit some questions, some good questions. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible, but we'll just let everybody speak into to the question if they have something that you want to add to the conversation. So, Alicia, what do you got for us?
All right. First question: what is some language we should be using or avoiding when trying to share beliefs instead of imposing them?
Read that again. Hold your mic up a little bit closer.
What is some language we should be using or avoiding when trying to share beliefs instead of imposing them?
Who wants to jump in? And for those of you we haven't officially introduced, this is Jessica Hansford, CEO of Clarion Psychiatric Center. Spoke for the last couple of years. Huge player in our community. Love her to death. So we wanted her to be a part of this too. So who has a thought?
I mean, I would just start by saying, I think whether you're coming from a church or a clinical point of view, humans respond to respect, not direction. And so making sure that you remember this conversation you're having. You want to listen to the prompting of the Spirit, but this conversation isn't about winning theological points, right? It is about maintaining trust while you offer hope to someone. So I think those words like you should or let's just do this, I think we need to be careful putting scripture on someone's wound. Do they need to hear those things? Are those things empowering and are they true and good? Yes. But sometimes when you are hurting and feel like you can't be honest about where you're coming from, someone saying, don't be anxious about anything, or God's not going to give you more than you can handle, tells me to clean myself up rather than share with you what is honestly happening.
That's good.
I would also say that sometimes one good rule of thumb is just be thinking about making I statements, so you can talk about your own journey. You can talk about what God's done for you. That's different from saying, therefore, that needs to be what your experience is similarly like. So I think it complements, what was just shared. And I think as much as you can connect the purpose for you being there with the language that they use. I think starting with how they're describing why they want you to be there with them can be what you then use as language, because you're adopting their framework and their language, which again, even if you want people to be drawn to Christ, is oftentimes the best way to do so, is not to kind of meet people and let me tell you why I'm here to do to you, but how can I be here to serve you? And so, just a few thoughts.
My thought is on that, and it might be a typical social worker, is that no social worker gives any good doesn't give advice. We just ask a lot of questions, and it's annoying. So my instinct would be to ask a lot of questions to explore and build that trust, to make sure you're understanding the approach of what that person is looking for. Because sometimes people say things, but they mean something else, or they approach a situation or ask a question, and it's a surface level question. They want to go a little deeper. So asking a lot of questions. What do you mean by that? Tell me more. That's really interesting. When did that happen to you? Or I would like to learn and build that relationship. So that's my instinct.
For me, the question made me think about something that I have the opportunity to do regularly. About a year ago, I started going to Clarion Psychiatric Center weekly to visit with patients on the different units. And when I go in, I never make the assumption that the individuals or the groups that I'm speaking with believe the same things that I believe. And so oftentimes when they'll ask questions, and sometimes they ask questions just because they just want to ask questions, or they want to try to get a rise out of me, or whatever. I always try to use language that again, like what you said, Dave. Hey, for me, I'm a follower of Jesus, and historically, this is what Christians would say about. Again, if they ask me, why am I suffering? Why this or why that? I'll try to frame it, not assuming that they're going to believe me, or that they even need to believe me, but I'll say this is what historically people who have believed in the God of the Bible, who have followed the way of Jesus, have addressed that concern or that question. Just being super mindful of not coming across like you have to believe this. What other?
Where do you see faith as strength in someone's mental health journey, and where can it be misunderstood?
I suppose it doesn't say, how can it be misunderstood by whom?
Yeah.
Like by somebody else, maybe for a person. I think one place that it's a strength is one thing we talked about earlier is in giving meaning and purpose to a person. When you face, this is true for all of us, that when we face suffering, do we believe that God is there with us in it? Do we believe God's somehow going to help us through this? James 1, consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, knowing that the test of your faith produces perseverance, right? That's a meaning-making truth amidst suffering. And I've seen the way that people who have that are able to undergo really difficult things because it's not just pointless. There's actually a God that loves them as they go through it. How does it get misunderstood by others? I think one way is in our time of culture wars, then people assume that if you're a person of faith, there's all these other things you must believe, or they put you in a camp with other people. And therefore, I've seen some social workers and mental health professionals assume I can't talk to this person of faith because I already know what I think about fill in the blank. And so I think that's where those hyperlocal relationships can help take down some of those walls that we've erected because of bigger national issues.
You guys have something?
The question really kind of hit home for me because I haven't shared really any of my testimony, and I'm not going to go into it now because we don't have time. But cut to the chase, where I grew up in a Christian home, but as of today, I'm the only believer, which is really interesting. So it's a huge, all the things we said today and all the discussions we had, I think that is the strength. The assumptions is that we don't have agency and that we don't have a part, we're not working hard, we're just depending on, God will work it out, and everything is almost like karma, God, and that there's no accountability to our actions, and that, so I think there's, or sloppy grace, I think sometimes it's called. So I think that could be a misunderstanding that could happen, is that, and why that hit home is because sometimes my family is, they're no longer followers of Jesus, and it's because they've become offended, or it doesn't line up, or they've seen things in the church and in others where that God didn't show up for them, and they blame that on God and aren't able to see past that. And so I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding of what faith means and how to walk that out. And it's just, the hurt is so deep that it could be a misunderstanding.
I work with people who have religious trauma. If I start collaborating with churches, how do I address their concerns?
Safety, 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 right? And I would say when we're working with people who have religious or spiritual trauma, it's very similar to when we're working with any other type of trauma, right? So you are reestablishing a sense of control for this person, right? Which means in this conversation, it is completely patient-driven. This is their story, their space, their opportunity to be able to share that. So giving them control. validating their experience, resisting the urge to be defensive or say that shouldn't have happened, or some people aren't the same as God, but allowing their experience to be true and allowing them to have that space to safely share their truth with you, and then avoiding re-traumatization. So I think in these sorts of things, you're there. How do I give them this space and this control? Is there something with your spiritual history that I should be aware of? That must have been really tough. Tell me more. I can understand why that would impact you that way. Validating their experience and knowing the speed is theirs, right? Don't push ahead. Watch for resistance and pull back, because God can play the long game. He's okay with that. So.
And I'll jump in, and if in response to that question, somebody is ready to say, I know faith ought to be important to me, and it is important to me, I'm just afraid of church, to have, again, somebody who can, walk along somebody and say, I validate that. I understand that. I'm not going to minimize it. I'm not going to just say, well, whatever happened. You need to forget. To be able to have connections, with churches, that if there's an introduction made, that introduction is made with the confidence that new faith leader is going to be sensitive, that if they walk through the church doors again, after perhaps years and years, that they're going to be met with patience and all the things that you would want, that a therapist would want for them if they begin to move back in, to have a faith community that recognizes that, And we've had that. I can tell some stories of people who walk through the door and they've been honest, like they've been hurt by the church. And the response is, I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry. In whatever space and time you need, we want to give it to you. This is a safe place for you to wrestle with all of that.
So one quick thing too, to build off that, I have seen multiple churches where they've connected with someone with a lived experience, and it hasn't started with attending Sunday morning gatherings. It started with getting together one-on-one. It started with a book club that occurs on another night of the week. It could be, depending on who the person is, and given the long game idea that was brought up, that the church can be the church in ways that don't mean complete re-entry and involvement with every phase of ministry. And I've seen that be valuable for certain people.
That's good.
This question's for David. Where do we draw the line between helping and enabling?
Well, I do think that one way into this is to think about a language that my colleague uses is the idea of a graduated response, by which he says, when someone, say, reaches out to your church, I don't know much story, I don't know much background there, I just want to respond with grace. When there's consistent needs that come up, if I'm going to stay involved, I'm going to start asking questions more as I start to notice patterns. And if I notice patterns that lead me to say, I have some concerns, I want to help you, but I'm seeing some decisions you've made that I don't think are beneficial for you, I may need to set some boundaries on what I can do in light of that. One phrase that sometimes gets used, I think, Laura, you talked about not just the no, but the yes, is to contain yourself by offering something. The idea is, it's not just if you ask me to help you, I might not just say no, because I don't want to enable you. I might say, I can't do that, but this is what I can do. And to focus on what I can do that makes sense given what I've learned is one way to start to set boundaries so that you're not enabling while still offering help that makes sense and still staying engaged with the person.
Can I?
Yeah, please. I'd ask these ladies too. Same thing.
I think we have a tendency as caregivers and as people with compassion, empathy, to want to give, and I find there's a balance. As soon as we transition from doing with to doing for. That's another, flag on the play there, where you don't want to do for people, but you're doing with people. So if you're working harder than the individual is working, then there's some probably enabling and boundaries there. So that's what I was going to ask.
What steps can we take as a publicly funded nonprofit social service agency running a mental health community-based care management program to incorporate integrated health that assesses spiritual needs at the people we serve without jeopardizing our funding and respecting individual beliefs?
Yeah, that's out of my zone. Somebody.
Okay, so at Clarion Psychiatric Center, we do not provide spiritual treatment. However, we do assess the spiritual needs of the whole human in front of us. That is absolutely a evidence-based patient care model to fully assess the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual needs of the human in front of you. And I would say the first thing is, it's been said today several times, bring your whole self to work, right? My good friend Amisha at MHY, she'll say, I'm praying for them without their consent. And I do every morning. I walk my units and cover them with prayer. There's so much darkness that's there. Remember to bring that part of yourself. Remember to bring that language. We talk a lot at Clarion Psych about offering grace to our patients. We talk a lot about this is a sacred space to be stepping into. We talk a lot about service. So bring all of who you are in there. And like Trent was saying, to be able to say, as a person of faith, I would see it this way. How are you making sense of this? Those types of things I think are helpful. And then I would say connecting. And that's what this is about, right? I'm not going to go provide spiritual care to my patients. However, I'm going to bring Trent in once a week and make him available. When something goes on that impacts my staff, I'm going to bring him in and sit him somewhere and tell people he's available to come and talk to them. So when you're providing resources to someone, include faith-based options within there, letting them know some people have found this to be very helpful. So I think, the thing that you're doing here today to get those resources, that's a piece of it too. So you can bring yourself and be all of who you are, assess all of who that person is and let them tell you their story and find different ways to connect them. Again, it may not have to be you, but you may be the one that ties them to the person that's going to do it.
And to pick up on the idea of the evidence-based piece, there are different organizations who've done research into this that can be cited with potential administrators, leaders, funders, groups like the Templeton Foundation that we're working with right now. University of Pennsylvania is doing a research study on Intersect. So once that's done and they develop a white paper on their findings, that's something I would show people to say, look, the University of Pennsylvania is not a faith-based institution. And so that's one place. The Faith Center, which used to be the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives in the federal government. There's a man there, Ben Odell, who's a great resource for being able to point you in the direction of work like this. There is the Spirit, Mind, Body Institute at the University of Columbia, or Columbia University, that is. And so there are different places where you can go, get information online, talk with them, and show that to people to show that this is evidence-based work. We're not just doing this because we're people of faith. We're doing it because the research has shown that it makes sense.
That's good.
How do you identify community needs other than food, clothing, and housing?
Ask questions. I'm such a social worker. Ask questions. That would be, you guys might have more insightful than that, but ask questions to a lot of people. That would be the follow-up point.
And look for barriers, right? Especially with someone who is struggling and things haven't worked before. Ask those questions and figure out, what were the barriers? And we realize more and more that especially in the churches. We put up barriers we don't realize are there. So really stopping long enough to kind of think through someone else's eyes what that day looks like. And, let's get to this. Outpatient appointment sounds like a really great discharge plan, but if they don't have a vehicle and they can't refill their medication, so then they can't get out of bed, all of the different barriers between here and there, how do we step in that gap?
Yeah, I don't know the who or the why behind that question, but I can say that years ago when this ministry began to shift from everybody come here, we want you to come here to be with us, to we need to go to our community. Instead of trying to be the best church in our community, we ask the question, what can we do to be the best church for our community, which are two different paths to walk on. I got in front of people. I got myself invited to a human services council meeting that gathered every week to kind of had weekly or once a month. I'm looking at, is it weekly or once a month? Once a month. That invited all the human services to cut together, and they just kind of shared what's going on. And I remember going the first few times and just listening as a pastor going, I had no idea all of these things are happening in my community. I took our county commissioner out for coffee and said, tell me what's going on in Clarion County, and what can a church like ours do to help? I listened to people in our congregation, the foster care director for our church, or for the county attended our church, and we sat down and I said, what can we do? And she said, talk about foster care. We need more foster parents. So if you're beginning to think as a church about how to, again, engage your community in different ways, then y'all just come to us and we'll give you Jesus, but we need to get to where you're at first. Just get in the right spaces and ask questions and listen.
I work in a secular agency. Is it appropriate to talk about faith if a client is the one to ask a question?
Can I share a story about that? So I'm from Canada, so super secular culture and agency. I would lose my license if I brought my whole self and asked to pray for people. So that is not my reality where I live. But a client in front of me was having a hard day, having a rough go of it, and used the Lord names in vain, like, oh, Jesus. And I was like, yeah, what about Jesus, right? And they're like, they just looked at me because, they were cursing. And I was like, are you a person of faith? And they said, oh, I used to be. And then I said, tell me more about that. And then, so that's how I was able to do it. I tried to find the slightest piece to be able to talk about that. And they didn't know I was a Christian the entire time until they showed up at my church one time. So you have to be really careful about those boundaries of that's the worst word, proselytization. And so that's how I was able to squeeze it in a very secular community.
I agree. All my work as a therapist has been in the secular community. Again, your prayer outside that room, not directly with that patient, counts, right? So please do that. And also, yes, again, you're assessing this whole human. And so when they give you any sort of piece, you can follow that thread. You can ask those questions. You can ask if that's been something that's been important to them at some point in their life, and tell me more about that. And how do you make meaning of that? And what might that look like if you explored that more? And all of those sorts of pieces. So just trusting that.
Let's look at churches together.
There you go.
Let's open up my computer. And what type of church did you go to? Anyone close to your house where you live? Meanwhile, it was my church, but anyway.
There's a helpful book by, I think his name is David Hodge, who used to be at UPenn, on spiritual assessments. And it just gives you different examples of questions you can ask. There's also different acronyms like hope assessment, spirit assessment. But I would say, to give one example, like in my own mobile psych rehab program, in our organization, they do a strengths, needs, barriers assessment. And so that would be a place where, depending on the person, especially if they brought it up, you could list among their strengths, The individual sees their faith as a strength because it blah, blah, blah. The individual sees a need they have for community and is interested in finding a church as one way. And so if I'm articulating this is what this person is saying and I'm doing it within the structures that the mental health field provides, then I think that's one way in to show, again, this isn't somehow veering off of mission. This is just what our mission is, but applying it to this dimension, just like I could apply it to the physical dimension, the emotional dimension, or the social dimension.
This is a random one. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
I think you should watch Bruce Willis as much as you can.
Yes.
Just because he said yes, I'm saying no.
And I'll say yes.
The only time I think to watch it is like Christmas. There you go.
For funding and HIPAA and getting donors, can we encourage testimony, tell their story, change name, or do anonymously, but share as part of making resources available, kind of like testimony advertising?
Not my world.
I don't.
Can you give patient testimonials when you remove the HIPAA language? Absolutely. I mean, you definitely see that on all kinds of advertisements and things. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but yes, as long as you scrub the data for anything, or if they give you permission to do so, but if you remove any identifying factors, you can provide that.
As an organization, you can? Now we're just having a conversation. Because I once heard that you, as a clinician, private practice, you cannot have testimonials on your website to convince, market.
And again, have I specifically? No, but you can pull quotes from it again if it's brushed from, rubbed from any.
In the U.S., you'd be free to do whatever you want. Bring your whole
This
self.
is not the conversation for that, PT. I haven't heard a joke about a 51st date yet, so there's still time.
Some sources say the fastest growing age group in the church attendance is Gen Z. From your experience, does that ring true? Second part of the question. Do you think Gen Z will be more acceptance of mental health discussions?
A couple thoughts on that. One, there's a book called iGen by Jean Twenge that said Gen Z, or iGen, Generation Group of the cell phone, has the most severe mental health crisis in decades and is the least religious of generations. However, there's a lot of people talking now about, a couple thoughts of that. One, even if they're less religious, that doesn't mean they're less spiritual. And there can still be people who are framing it in spiritual terms. And certainly that book was in the teens, I believe. So I do think there's recently been more talk of this. Even there's a book called The Anxious Generation, if some of you have read that, by Jonathan Haidt. And he, writing as an atheist, or at least an agnostic, says in there that we all have a God-shaped hole in our hearts, which is an interesting thing for an atheist psychologist to say. So what I would say is there's definitely people saying Gen Z is less religious, but I do think there are some hints that you're seeing an increase in recent years in spiritual hunger, and anecdotally, I think you can make a case that there's increased desire for that dimension to be addressed.
You guys found anything? Anything to add? Time will be the test, right? You can answer that question a whole lot better in 10 years, 15 years than you can today, for sure.
What is some language we should be using or avoiding when trying to share beliefs instead of imposing them?
I think we started that
Wait,
one.
you just said, did we not answer it well the first time?
No, I'd like to
sorry.
Okay. Well, we made it through. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Awesome. Well, did you guys have anything else that I really would like to say one more thing before we go? While you're here, anything? All right. Well, give these guys a hand. Thank you for participating. Thank you. I'll take the mics. Thank you.